Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
I'm Sorrel. Do we always stop to recognize the wonders all around us? Visiting the Dead Sea may be one of those opportunities to step out of our everyday lives and stand quietly in awe before nature. The Eastern Sea, the Arava Sea, it was even known as the Stinking Sea because of the sharp bite of sulfur in the air, and the Sea of Lot are all ancient names that were used for what today is usually referred to as the Dead Sea. Some have suggested that the biblical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were located along the Dead Sea shore. The lowest point on the surface of the earth, the Dead Sea, lies 418 meters. That's 1,371 feet.
For the Americans.
For the Americans among us, below sea level. It is the deepest saline lake on Earth. Yes, it is actually a lake, not a sea, plunging to a depth of 40 meters, 130 feet for the Americans among us. While the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans reach a salt content of slightly over 3%, in comparison, the Judean Desert's Dead Sea contains a salt content of 34%. Besides specific microbes adapted to the caustic mix, no life can survive in the Dead Sea soup. Josephus, the Jewish historian, rebel commander, and the major chronicler of the Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire, relates that the Roman general Vespasian, brought to Judea to quell the Jewish revolt, traveled south, past Jericho, and arrived at the shores of the Dead Sea. Vespasian had heard of the unusual properties of the Salt Sea, including the notion that the extremely high salt content meant that even people who couldn't swim could not sink in these waters. Arriving at the Dead Sea shore, Vespasian ordered his troops to find non-swimmers, bind them tight, and fling them into the oily waters. Not exactly the same drill that our travelers go through today when taking a float on the Dead Sea or at a spa. Since the 1970s, the Dead Sea has experienced a boom in medical tourism. Swedes, Germans, and Brits come in their droves, thousands, during the cold North European winters to soak in the healing mineral waters and enjoy the desert sun. International bodies like UNESCO and the New Seven Wonders have declared the Dead Sea and sites like Qumran and Masada as outstanding locations of natural wonder and historical cultural value.
2,000 years after Vespasian and Josephus, and about a century after the explorers and archaeologists of the Palestine Exploration Fund, the Dead Sea is disappearing. Sea levels are dropping dramatically, and it could be that our descendants, even our grandchildren, will hear a myth of a unique salt sea as they stand peering into the Dead Sea crater. Some perspective. British archaeologists, geographers, and explorers, under the auspices of the Palestine Exploration Fund, they crossed the land of Israel throughout the second half of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century. Their archaeological work can be seen today both above and below Jerusalem's Temple Mount, the noble sanctuary, and all along the Western Wall. Among their excavation and cartographic projects were the periodic measuring of the height of the Dead Sea as it met the Judean Desert cliffs. So when we drive south on Route 90 from Jerusalem towards En-Gedi and Masada beyond, we pass the Ein Sukim, Ein Fashcha Reserve. If you're especially alert and your tour educator assists, you'll notice a black line on the cliffside and the faint imprint of the letters P-E-F, Palestine Exploration Fund, the exit side of the bus as you head south. When the marker was made, and was originally red, not black, nearly a century ago, this modest marker showed the level of the Dead Sea up to the cliffside on what today is the road. Today, sea level is over 40 meters, 250 feet below the Palestine Exploration Fund marker. Scientists estimate the Dead Sea is evaporating at an accelerated rate. Since the 1960s, the Dead Sea has been shrinking. The shoreline currently recedes nearly 1.5 meters, 4.9 feet annually. Basically, the height of a child is disappearing every year.
That's a very sobering thought, Scott.
Right? I mean, it's a huge, huge and very rapid deterioration. Population growths, including in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Israel, in Jordan, and the Palestinian territories, it just means that more and more waters are diverted from the sources that feed the Dead Sea for irrigation, for drinking water, for these growing populations.
It's also the climate crisis as well plays a role in that.
100%. Higher temperatures, less precipitation in an already arid zone, and higher rates of evaporation. The industrial mining of the mineral deposits is a major industry.
It's important.
And very important in a country where particularly there's very little natural resources. But it does have a negative impact on the health of the Dead Sea and the surrounding Judean Desert. Simply put, as the mining is going on, much more water is removed from the sea by industry than is being replaced. From the top of Masada, many of you have stood there and you've looked out onto the Dead Sea. And in recent years, you remember, you can see clearly a northern pool that remains relatively full. But if you look towards the south, the section of the Dead Sea, it's really just a remnant of this once magnificent natural wonder. In fact, the Lake Southern Basin, where Israel's resorts are largely located, the area around Ein Bokek, is actually an artificial evaporation pool of Dead Sea water that's maintained by the Dead Sea Works, that same Israeli chemical company extracting minerals from the lake's water. From the 1960s, bottom line, nearly 1/3 of the Dead Sea has disappeared.
There's that famous Israeli song that comes to mind praising the desert oasis of En Gedi. It goes, "The blue sea of death will move softly, and above a small cloud will roam. The tamarisk tree will budge in silence, and each line in sand will be engraved in beauty."
Yam hamaved hakachol balat yanua. Right? Anyone who sat around an Israeli campfire will know that song.
Yes. En Gedi is a secular hymn to the beauty of the lands of Israel and the connection of the people to this place. And it's, there's this kind of dissonance, right? Because when you're going down Route 90, and it's a very windy road, you're talking about our travelers being alert. I'm just kind of like holding on to my stomach.
It's kind of up and down the cliffside, and there are points where you're looking out and you see very dramatically the drop to the Dead Sea and, of course, the mountains of Jordan on the other side. Yeah,
actually, sometimes there are some sections of the roads that can resemble more a scene from Mad Max, like abandoned beachfront properties, sections of collapsed roads, and then, like you said, in the distance, a receding sea that are, peppered with the salt formations scattered along the dry shore.
When we talk about the area and this kind of what looks like sometimes an apocalyptic landscape, in 2005, there were 1,000 of these sinkholes that were counted along the receding shore. Fresh water, mainly from winter rains, was flooding the desert basin. It then melts the salt. Think of salt that we use in cooking. It's the same exact thing. And then as the salt is melting, it causes the cave-in of not only the salt, but also the layers above, the surface layers that the salt is holding in place. So these sinkholes, these pits, they literally pockmark the entire area, growing exponentially all throughout the years. Once again, 2005, about 1,000, and more recently, about 6,000 sinkholes counted all along the Dead Sea shore.
I mean, you think about the phenomenon of how the Dead Sea is sinking each year, and it kind of like makes you think about the Jewish people and their relationship to the lands of Israel. The return of the Jewish people to the lands of Israel, it instilled in the Jews a powerful drive to settle, to develop, to make the desert bloom. So we have this kind of idea of the Jews and their relationship to preserve, to build its natural environment. I think you mentioned the other day this poem. Scott, you were talking about a famous poem by Avram Slonsky. And in this poem, he writes about building the land, how laying a road is a sacred act. He writes, "Dress me, good pious mother, in a glorious coat of many colours, and with dawn lead me to toil. My country wraps itself in light as in a prayer shawl. Houses stand out like phylacteries, and like phylactery straps, the highways that palms have paved glide down. Here the beautiful town prays matins to its creator, and among the creators is your son, Abram, a hymn writer, road paver in Israel."
Yeah, sure. I mean, Shlonsky was part of this group of pioneers in the period after the First World War, the so-called Third Aliyah. They were part of a special pioneering unit known as the labor battalions, and they built roads in the Galilee, and they built kibbutzim all throughout the country, and they were active in the area on the outskirts of Jerusalem. And again, this poem, this picture of the phylacteries, right? Phylacteries,
beautiful image,
is tefillin, right? Is the boxes and the straps.
And protective. There's this element of like protective element.
Exactly. And again, the phylactery, the tefillin, the boxes and straps made of leather, which religious Jews use in the morning to intensify the meditative moments of morning prayer. He talks about the building of the country as a kind of putting on of tefillin.
I love it.
And so for these people, the care of the land, the building of the land, the activity that they were participating in as pioneers, which seems kind of, mundane, was definitely very, very difficult. He saw as a sacred act as the Jewish people returned to the land of Israel.
Do you think that we've distanced ourselves somewhat from that ideal as time passed?
Look, it's impossible to stand still, and it's impossible to think that the kinds of revolutionary thinking that captured young people in the period following the Russian Revolution is going to stay alive in the 21st century.
Yeah.
We live in very, very different times. And the question of how we choose to preserve, develop, take care of, pass down the land that we live on is definitely a major question, which is at least as important as any of the other social, cultural, security issues that contemporary Israel faces.
It's like everything else, it's a challenge. It's also an opportunity. It's a juggling act.
That's right. For sure. Like all challenges and opportunities, the question ultimately is, what are we going to make of it?
100%. And, if we think about that existential need, going back to that need that we had to provide a home for the Jewish people, I don't think there's another country that's achieved the extraordinary levels of progress that modern Israel has achieved. But yeah, the consequence of that is going to be, well, okay, let's look at the consequences for example, the natural wonder of the Dead Sea, and how do we today face that, knowing that since the 1960s there's been this steady, consistent decline?
No, 100%. I would agree with that. I mean, I think that's a question of everything that makes us adults, meaning the realization that there's a price for everything.
Yeah.
A child doesn't consider that. An adult has to consider that. And the very intense and, as you point out, rapid development in Israel, it has seen a massive reduction of Israel's open spaces, a shrinking of its biodiversity, and degradation of our very limited freshwater resources. The story of the Dead Sea is one dramatic example of the price, and you noted the opportunity of development. Now, there have been a number of Israeli plans throughout the years, and particularly during the 1990s, a number of joint Israeli, Jordanian, Palestinian plans that hope to resurrect the Dead Sea through cooperative ventures. Massive canals being built to feed the Dead Sea from the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. I think we mentioned in an earlier podcast that Theodor Herzl, in his utopian novel, Old New Land, he dreamed at that point of building a hydroelectric canal that would generate electricity for the country from the Med to the Dead. Unfortunately, when we take a look at reality, all these very well-intentioned plans, very, very little has come of them.
Although it is very heartwarming to see and encouraging that this deep love of the land has given birth to national projects like the Society for the Protection of Nature, the National Trail, the campaign to educate Israeli children, although you don't always see it when you go on hikes in Israel that it's that successful, but campaigns to educate Israeli children not to pick and destroy the country's wildflowers. And it was that love of the land also that pushed activists like Elon Tal, academic activist and member of parliament, to found Israel's first lobby and policy center for environmental issues, Adam, Teva and Din, People, Nature and Law, in 1990. So when you look at it from that lens, right, on an optimistic, on a hopeful note, saving the Dead Sea is possible out of that same love for the land. You know, it's all about, like you say, adult choices. So, you know, we think about Israel in its infancy. Well, we're growing up and we have to kind of see that responsibility and keep that front and center in our minds.
Definitely. I mean, Elon Tal, both in terms of his, again, as you mentioned, academic work, his public activism, his work as a member of Knesset, he wrote a book called Pollution in the Promised Land. It's actually the first environmental history of the land of Israel and the modern state of Israel. And he echoes that sentiment that you share about the importance of the choices that we make. And in some ways, one could argue maybe, what is Zionism? Zionism is the Jewish people's coming to grips with sovereignty, means having power. And having power means making meaningful choices and acting responsibly, not just to have a better present, but also to ensure a better future for future generations. And Elon says the following in that book, and I'll just quote those couple of lines. If you have a chance to go and read even a section of Pollution in the Promised Land, it's a really, really important read.
And it's translated.
It originally appeared in English from Berkeley University Press, University of California Press.
Great.
And then subsequently was actually translated in a Hebrew version. I'm actually going to quote now from the English, believe it or not. It is important to remember that it is not divine decree, but human ambition, myopia, negligence, and sometimes greed that brought these curses to the land. Precisely because the people of Israel there created many environmental problems, they were also blessed with the collective wisdom, wealth, laws, technologies, and passion to solve them. The same Zionist zeal that allowed an ancient nation to defy all odds for an entire century can be harnessed to confront the newest national challenges. More than any of their ancestors, the present generation stands at an ecological crossroads, offered the choice of life and good or death and evil. This last chance to preserve a healthy, promised land for posterity is a weighty privilege. Surely, as it writes the next chapters in its environmental history, Israel will once again choose life.
That is so powerful. And I just want to reread one sentence which you just read and really struck with me and resonated with me. The same Zionist zeal that allowed an ancient nation to defy all odds for an entire century can be harnessed to confront the newest national challenge. Because therein is the empowerment, right? As bleak as things look, we have it. We have the data. We have the proof. We can do hard things.
And as we all of us reflect on the Dead Sea, it is a kind of an allegory. We have to consider the Dead Sea. We have to consider the rest of the land of Israel. Some of us live in Connecticut. Some of us live in California. Some of us live in other places. We have to consider the environments that we call home. And how do our daily choices impact on the world we live in?
Yep.
How do we adopt habits, reducing waste, conserving water, supporting sustainability, that echo the love of the land, which has been so central to Israel's ethos? Small actions, hey, they ripple outward. And like the Dead Sea, the health of our home, of our entire planet, what Carl Sagan calls Spaceship Earth, depends on us choosing life for generations to come. And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
Hi, I'm Mike Hollander, and welcome to Something for the Road. I'm one of the expert Jewish educators at J Squared. I, by means of introduction, grew up in a place called Canada. That's probably why I speak a little bit funny. In the Pacific Northwest, which is a very, very lush green environment. And about 36 years ago, I made Aliyah, moved to this beautiful country, and I live right in the center of the country in a little town called Modi'in, which is quite timely because you're going to be talking about it when you celebrate Hanukkah in the coming days and coming weeks. But one of my favorite places in the country is where I want to take you today, and that is nestled in the Judean Desert, a beautiful oasis called Gedi. Why is it one of my most beautiful places that I recommend from people must not miss when they come to Israel? Look, Gedi is on the shore of one of the most driest deserts in the entire world. But the moment you approach the desert is the moment you leave Jerusalem. And once you get out of your hotel and get on the highway, previous episodes that you've heard on Something from the Road, you talk about the place that you go to. But I want to talk a little bit today about the route that you take in order to get to that place. Because although Gedi is a symbol of beauty and diversity of the land of Israel, the actual physical journey that you take is a must-see. So a lot of people getting up early in the morning to go down to the desert oftentimes cover the blinds in their windows. I'm going to encourage you to keep them windows open and see what you see, because you're going to see an incredible change. A 4,000-foot descent from the heights of Jerusalem and the mountains of Jerusalem and the plush rainfall in the winter down to one of the driest deserts in the world. Within half an hour, you're going to be on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. And within about half an hour of reaching the Dead Sea, you're going to get to Gedi. And as I said before, Gedi, situated in the heart of this very, very dry desert, is a place that, to me at least, is not just a place of beauty, but also a place of inspiration. And when you look at this tiny little nature reserve, it is a nature reserve with two rivers that flow into the Dead Sea, rivers of sweet water, I should say. En route, you're passing by this stark brown yellow of the Judean Desert, intermingled with these occasional rich, lush green patches, either of date palms. The biggest date orchards in the country grow on the shore of the Dead Sea in Israel. Or, if you're here in the right time of year, you might see massive fields of watermelons. It might seem bizarre, but along the shore of the Dead Sea, some of the richest agriculture grows, including the sweetest watermelon in the entire country. So you're seeing this incredible diversity, this tension between the brown desert and the green of the agriculture and the blue or the turquoise color of the Dead Sea. And then you get off the bus and you start to walk and you all of a sudden hear something different. You hear rushing of waters. And you walk into a place where 365 and a quarter days of year, there's fresh, sweet water that is percolating down through the mountains in the Judean hills and eventually finds its way out through geological strata along the shore of the Dead Sea. So you're all of a sudden in a different place. You feel different. It sounds different. And then as you walk up toward the water, you're saying, this is absolutely incredible. This is what a desert oasis actually is. And as you turn back from the oasis, to get back to the bus and maybe to get to the air conditioning and get yourself a nice ice cream to cool off, all of a sudden, I'm going to ask you to stop and look around, because you're going to see the sharp contrast, as I said, in the diversity of the land. You're going to see the brown and the yellow of the desert. You're going to see the blue and the turquoise of the Dead Sea. You're going to see the green of the flora that is growing around the oasis at Gedi, and you're going to stop in your tracks. And you're not going to be alone, because 3,000 years ago, someone else was inspired similarly in that exact same spot. And that was no more than a little shepherd named David. And David was a shepherd who eventually becomes king, who we believe is the author of the Psalms, who was so inspired by his experience in Gedi and in the Judean Desert. And then you take that leap across millennia and get to the 1950s. A new kibbutz, adjacent to this perennial source of sweet water, Gedi, is founded in the early 1950s. And a teenage boy coming to volunteer to pick some agriculture on the kibbutz for a few weeks named Eitan Peretz finds himself so inspired by the beauty of the place that he goes off by himself, sits, listens to the sound of the water, the chirping of the birds, and writes a beautiful poem. That poem, Gedi, is probably the most covered poem musically by Israeli musicians, from the great Arik Einstein to the contemporary Jane Bordeaux. I want to end with just a short quote from Eitan Peretz. Gedi is an oasis. A new day is not like yesterday, and tomorrow brings a glowing future to her. In you, the beauty shines in glory, and the heart will ponder and desire. So when you come to Israel, make sure that you add to the list of must-sees and must-dos and must-experience the amazing oasis at Gedi, and hopefully you too will have an opportunity to be inspired by the diversity and the beauty of that unique and spectacular landscape. See you soon.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, travel safely and keep wandering. I'm Sorrel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.